Do we really possess free will? I mean, are our choices genuinely free and independent, or are they influenced by factors beyond our control? What I mean is, do we control our behavior, or is there some predetermined event that occurs that controls us? And I'm not talking necessarily religious. This question basically sparks a monumental philosophical debate divided between those who believe in absolute free will and those who see it basically as an illusion. Yet there are nuanced views in between the two ideologies, with some arguing that free will can coexist with determinism, while others just completely firmly disagree. And this is a topic that invites us to challenge our deepest assumptions about free will or determinism. Welcome to today's episode of Unscripted Life, the podcast that confronts you with the unsettling truth: life doesn't follow a script, and much of what we've been taught is an illusion. I'm your host, Alan Stafford. Join me as we dive into the compelling notion that free will might just be a myth. Thank you for joining me again, and if this is your first time, thank you for joining me to begin with. Free will, I mean, we're not talking Free Willy, the movie. We're talking free will, our ability to make choices autonomously from any other predetermined idea. So free will is basically the ability for us humans to make choices independently of external coercion or, as I said, predetermination, essential to discussions on morality, ethics, and responsibility. So basically, free will is the idea that we have control of our own morality, of our own ethics, and of our own responsibility. I mean, and this goes back all the way back to the Enlightenment, the 18th century. You had philosophers, basically political philosophers, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, who argued that free will is central to understanding human rights and the nature of governance. So this goes back, this thinking of free will goes all the way back to the 18th century, like I said, during the Enlightenment, which was basically a European transformation. It was a reprogramming, so to speak, of politics, philosophy, science, and communication during that time period. And part of that was to determine or to discuss, does man actually create his own behaviors? Does he govern himself? And these philosophers, John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, both argued that yes. Basically, I mean, John Locke's quote is, men are to be judged by their actions, not their thoughts. So in essence, it's not our thinking that controls us, it's our actions that control us. I mean, that's pretty heavy. Have you ever really thought about free will? I mean, you automatically get up, do things throughout your day, and you're not thinking about how you're doing them. You're just thinking that you need to do them, but you're not really realizing that there might be something predetermined neurologically in your mind that causes you to behave in a certain way beyond your conscious control. And these challenges to free will, the illusion of free will, are basically rooted in neuroscientific findings and deterministic perspectives, basically suggesting that our decisions are not as autonomous as we believe. I mean, there have been neuroscientific studies, such as those by the neuroscientist Benjamin Libet, who have shown brain activity related to decisions occur before we are consciously aware of choosing those decisions. That's pretty fascinating. So basically what it's saying, what Libet is arguing is that there is scientific evidence to prove that there is neuroactivity going on in our brains that are making decisions for us before we are consciously aware of these decisions. So if free will is an illusion, think about the implications that it has on our society and on everyday life for us, in America at least. Because free will underpins our legal system. It affects social interactions. It highlights its importance in fostering personal responsibility and moral integrity. So imagine for a moment, if neuroscience is correct, our behavior is predetermined through neurological activity before our conscious actually registers it and behaves on it. How does that change our society? And I know what you're probably thinking, no, we have free will because I know I make decisions for myself. This is not what I'm talking about, because what I'm saying is neuroscience proves that some behavior is caused by neural activity before the conscious mind knows that it's doing it. So we've already seen proof for the neuroscientific part of that. The question comes into play if we adopt a deterministic view on humanity and say that free will does not truly exist, what implication does that have for our society? Our legal system is in jeopardy because our legal system is completely based on the notion that man has free will, because we punish based on man's crimes, right? Man makes a choice, and I'm using the word man in terms of human, not man as in terms of male here. I'm using it in the archaic term meaning humans. We as humans, if we make a certain choice, we are punished for that choice. There's a consequence for that, and that's our legal system is based on that free will choice. But if free will is a myth, if it's an illusion, then how do we base our behavior on? Even our morality. Is our morality predetermined? Are we designed to have a specific set of morals, and yet we don't know that, and we react to that deterministic view inside of our neurological makeup? I mean, I don't know. But I think it's interesting. I mean, entertain the thought for a moment that, our judicial system, like I said, operates on the principles that individuals are held accountable for their actions. Imagine for a moment that we're not. I mean, what kind of we would have to set up a society where we have consequences based on a predetermined action that we do subconsciously in our conscious. And if that's too heavy for you, it's even heavy for me. You got to get your mind wrapped around that, and we can't. It's hard for us humans to wrap our minds around things we can't see and understand. So we make up all these stories, to justify things that we don't understand, like religion, political ideology, and a whole host of other fictional realities that we engage in. But I just think that's real fascinating, though. I think it's interesting to argue the fact that free will is a myth. Then that basically unravels everything we know as humans in our society, everything we've created that is really subjective. It's not even objective. The legal system's not an objective thing. It's purely subjective. So is morality. It's purely subjective. Well, maybe because it's subjective, it's really not really free will anyway. Didn't think about that, right? I mean, and free will is viewed very differently across philosophical and cultural perspectives. I mean, you have the idea of the Christian doctrine of predestination, but yet God has given man free will. So it's kind of almost an oxymoron. We have a predestination, we have determinism built into religion, yet man has free will. So that contradicts itself right there. And then the concept of karma in Buddhism, where your actions follow you throughout your life and into the next life as well. And you have to do certain things in order to basically repent or to cleanse yourself of that bad karma. I mean, Stoics, even philosophically, Stoicism, Epicureanism, if I said that correctly, they believe that basically moral fate is predetermined. It's quite opposite of religion. And that's probably why religion and philosophy are always at odds with one another, because they're both opposite of one another. So if we take free will away from man and believe in determinism, where neurologically our brains decide for us subconsciously what our conscious mind will do, that basically unravels everything we've ever learned, whether you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or a Buddhist, or a Sikh or a pagan, whatever. It basically says human beings are not responsible for their actions and their morality. That will mess up and unravel our legal system and everything. So it's easier to sit there and play along with the illusion that we have free will than it is to go against it, even though there is scientific evidence demonstrating determinism exists neurologically. We're going to talk about maybe combining both of those ideologies together in a bit, though. So hang on to your hats there. I don't want you to think it's going to be one or the other. But you can certainly pick a side, because there's no right or wrong. It's just, what is your philosophical perspective on this? And I'm not going to tell you mine just yet, okay? And there's even more proof that challenges the idea of free will. I mean, the unconscious mind can control behavior and is capable of executing complex decisions without the need for conscious input. That's neurology. That's neuroscience. That's studies. I mean, a significant amount of our decision-making occurs subconsciously, and it's influenced by, stimuli, emotions, and biases that are not in our conscious awareness, folks. And there's psychological studies on the priming effect since the 1980s that show how exposure to certain stimuli and some of its subliminal stimuli that can subconsciously influence behaviors and our our decisions, basically suggesting our choices are not entirely free or deliberate. So we have neuroscience backing us up and challenging free will. Again, this isn't conclusive to everything we do, but it is a big part of who we are as humans, challenging the notion that free will exists, that we act on our own agency. And there's even more neuroscientific evidence of predetermined decisions. There are neuroscientific studies, including those on readiness potential, that suggest our brain activity related to decision occurs before our conscious awareness, basically challenging the notion of free will. We make decisions before we're consciously aware of it. And I keep beating that down because that's a big part of determinism, that our subconscious makes those decisions before our consciousness is aware of it. And yet we're not even aware of that. And this is why we have this illusion of free will, because we can't comprehend what we're not seeing or feeling internally. So we say to ourselves, we are making this choice, when in fact, the subconscious is making a decision before our conscious mind is making that decision for us. So you're not really in control of your own decision. And this is scientific proof, folks. This is neuroscientific studies, like I said, since the 1980s on the priming effect, where certain stimuli influence our behaviors and our decisions. And a lot of this study comes from Benjamin Libet's experiments back in the 1980s. Basically, his experiments revealed that the readiness potential in the brain, which is a marker of neural activity, precedes the conscious decisions to act. Basically, it's implying that decisions are initiated by unconscious neural processes. So again, studies done by neuroscientists like Libet and other neuroscientists for the last probably 40, 50 years are demonstrating that we're making decisions before our conscious mind knows it, supporting determinism and debunking the idea of free will. But again, the question I ask, is it one or the other, or can there be a combination of both? That's a good question, right? And I don't know. And you can't sit there and say conclusively that I have free will and that's it, because you don't know yourself, and I don't know myself. And neuroscientists who do the studies only know certain parts of it. And think about this here for a second. The belief in free will basically deeply influences our emotional responses, such as guilt, pride, and the sense of achievement. Can you imagine if we robbed ourselves of free will? What would be our motivation to achieve? If we said, hey, free will doesn't exist, and your efforts to become successful are pretty much predicated on some deterministic value or neurological process in your mind, what are you going to think? Well, forget it. I'm not even going to try it. I'll just let my brain subconsciously put it into my head, and my consciousness will take over. Can you imagine that? We'd have like a world of lazy people, I think. I think it works symbiotically. I think they work together in tandem. And this is just my own personal theory. But then again, it's limited by my own thinking, right? And my own thinking is biased and flawed because I really don't know all the ins and outs of what's going on inside my brain. But can you imagine? There'd be no more feelings of guilt. Why would you feel guilty? I guess you would have. Okay, so I take that back. There still would be feelings of guilt because subconsciously, neurologically, you would be feeling guilty, and you would think that you're feeling guilty. Maybe this explains why some people get depressed, and they don't know why they get depressed, or why they feel guilty, or why they feel embarrassed when they shouldn't feel embarrassed. Maybe their subconscious is actually triggering that, and then it's spilling over into their consciousness, and then they're feeling the embarrassment or guilt. And then they realize, why? Why am I feeling this? That's a possibility. I wouldn't discount that at all. Heck, you can go with that. You could say next time you feel guilty about something and you really don't want to feel guilty, you can simply blame it on a neurological process, determinism. Basically, it's happening before you even know it. And you can say, hey, look, you know what? I'm feeling guilty, but I really shouldn't feel guilty because I shouldn't feel guilty about what I just did. So it's really something that's occurring in my subconscious. So let's just go ahead and scratch that. I don't feel guilty. Move on. I guess you could use that as an excuse and cite neurological studies, on determinism. So, psychological research basically suggests that feelings of guilt and pride assume control over our own actions. And undermining free will would basically lessen these emotional responses, as I said, basically impacting personal motivation and our self-esteem. I wonder how that would affect us. Think about that. How would that affect your self-esteem if you realized that you don't have the free will to be motivated, that motivation is determined in the subconscious? How does that impact you consciously? So if you want to go to the gym and you decide, oh, well, I'm just not going to go to the gym because my subconscious will take that over. And if I want to go, it will decide that I should go for myself. Maybe that's a reason a lot of people use laziness or don't want to do something because they just go, oh, my subconscious is telling me not to do this. That might make sense. I mean, and aside from our own personal feelings in the legal system, as we've discussed, you got cultural perceptions of fate. So, folks, on the flip side, if we're taking a look at free will and defending free will, people often argue, experts, philosophers argue that determinism, which let me pause right here and say that determinism, if you don't know, basically means that things are predetermined, okay? That your behaviors are predetermined. And so determinists will argue that neurological stimuli basically predetermine your behavior in your subconscious before your conscious fully engages in that behavior. But determinism is often criticized for basically oversimplifying human decision-making. And it doesn't take into account the unpredictable and varied nature of human responses. So if we take that apart for a second and think, let's imagine for a moment that free will does not exist. And we're really just, everything is deterministic. Everything occurs subconsciously in the mind before your conscious reacts. What the argument against determinism is saying that if you're presented with a problem, a situation that you need to make a decision, the subconscious mind will make that decision. That's a deterministic view before the conscious mind does. What supporters of free will come back and say is that, let's say the mind makes that decision before the conscious does, but now you have to make adjustments to that quickly. And they're arguing that it's oversimplified, that determinism is oversimplified, and that those complex decisions that follow that one decision are what free will is about, if that makes any sense to you at all. So basically they're saying, let's entertain the thought that your subconscious mind makes a choice before your conscious mind does, but there's an outside element that is impacted by your decision, your subconscious decision. It creates an unpredictable environment. Now you have to make a counter decision to correct that unpredictability. So what happens? Is that determinism? No, they say that's free will because you're making that on the fly, because your mind cannot calculate that, or they're arguing that the mind doesn't calculate that beforehand, which maybe it does. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a neurologist, but anyway, that is what the supporters of free will say, that determinism is oversimplified and it doesn't take into account the unpredictable nature of human behavior. I mean, and they have proof for that as well. So, you have the determinists that have proof neurologically that decisions are made subconsciously before the conscious mind knows it. And you have those that support free will saying that, well, we have proof too. And basically the supporting data is that quantum mechanics, in quantum mechanics, there are several events that occur without deterministic causes, because in science there's always a cause and effect. But in quantum mechanics, you have some of these events that occur without any predetermined cause, without anything occurring before the actual event. And basically this challenges those strict deterministic views, in that in quantum mechanics, you can have something occur without a cause and effect, a predetermined cause. So I don't know where your mindset is right now. Are you leaning towards, I believe in free will, or are you leaning towards a more deterministic viewpoint that our subconscious basically makes a decision before our conscious reacts? And if I was a betting man, I would bet that you're probably leaning towards free will. And here's why I say that, because free will is easy to understand. It's you doing what you do. Determinism requires a heavier thought process. It requires you to suspend your belief in what you physically see occurring, meaning the action that you're taking and the thoughts that you're having to take that action, and assume that there's something underlying that that conscious thought that's in the subconscious that's causing you to do that conscious action. So it's easier to go towards free will. This is probably why everything is predicated on free will. Our judicial system, our morality, our ethics, our personal feelings, it's all based on free will. We are free to choose how we feel and how we act, and therefore there's consequences to those actions, rather than looking at it and saying, well, there's a possibility that there's a deterministic way that we act, and that's in the subconscious. So either way you look at it, you're going to have opposing views. But there's a third way to look at this here, and it's the compatibilist perspective. I'm talking about compatibilism between free will and determinism. So basically, a compatibilist will argue that free will can exist alongside determinism. So it's a good way of looking at, I'm in the middle of the road and we can have both. So a compatibilist suggests that freedom involves acting according to your own motivation and your own desires. And both of these can be meaningful even if they are determined. What a compatibilist says is that free will can exist they say free will can exist and it can be meaningful even if there is determinism. Even if things are predetermined. So an argument for compatibilism, so taking a look at Daniel Dennett's argument, he's a philosopher, compatibilist, basically arguing that the ability to reflect and act according to a person's reasoned desires provides a practical form of free will, basically aligning freedom with self-aware decision-making rather than pure spontaneity. So what Dennett is arguing is that our ability to reflect and to act to our own reasoned desires provides a practical form of free will, and it aligns that freedom with our self-awareness, our decision-making, rather than pure spontaneity. So what he's basically saying is that we can have free will, we can have determinism, it can be meaningful, and it doesn't have to be spontaneous. So in the end, our nature is really not a constraint on our freedom, but it's the very basis for our capacity to imagine and to shape our destinies. And this is what Daniel Dennett is ultimately saying in compatibilism, between bringing self-awareness and determinism together, that we can coexist, find meaning, and still have free will and have things still predetermined. But what about the role of consciousness and self-awareness in making our choices? How does that play into making our choices? Well, both of them, both consciousness and self-awareness, are crucial in order for us to have genuine free will. We need consciousness and that self-awareness to have free will, because it provides the capacity for self-reflection. In order for us to be self-reflecting, we need to have that free will. It also provides provides planning and our voluntary decision-making. I mean, there's research in cognitive psychology that suggests conscious thought processes enable us to consider future consequences. It also enables us to weigh alternative choices and align actions with our personal values and our long-term goals. So basically, free will helps us stay motivated. It helps us align our personal values, what we value now, with our long-term goals, what we want to achieve in the future. So there's an argument for free will, and then there's an argument for determinism, and then there's an argument for compatibilism. It's kind of a tough word to say, but needless to say, wherever you fall on the spectrum between free will and determinism, I believe that they go hand in hand, they coexist together, because if we're looking at it this way, self-awareness and consciousness itself requires free will, unless we can prove through neuroscience that it's predetermined, and we haven't done that yet. But yet there are things that occur within human behavior in the subconscious that the conscious is not yet aware of, but the conscious acts upon it when the subconscious takes and processes that information, that stimuli. So I think in the end, if you take a look at it, there is a symbiotic relationship between free will and determinism, and that is called compatibilism. So I'm always going to take the middle of the road. I don't have the answer as far as one or the other is concerned. I just know that both can coexist and both do exist, and from the based on the evidence and based on science itself. But the takeaway is, despite the challenges, a nuanced understanding of free will, and it's supported by both philosophical reasoning and scientific insights, affirms that free will exists and that it is important in the role in human behavior. And this is subject to ongoing debates and research, to continue to refine our understanding of free will, emphasizing its role in moral responsibility and personal identity. So don't expect the judicial system to fall because we don't have free will. That's not going to happen. So you can't sit there and commit a crime and say, well, I was not in control, so therefore I shouldn't be punished for this. It was some sort of subconscious, effort or process that caused me to do this action. Therefore, I should not be punished for it. That's not going to happen, folks. So bringing it all together, aligning, the fallacy or the myth or the illusion of free will with an unscripted life, a life where there's really no scripts written for how you should behave and who you should be. How do we align that? Well, basically recognizing the limitations for the illusion of free will enhances the theme of embracing life's unpredictability. Because life is unpredictable. We cannot control what we cannot control. And that's about everything. Even our thoughts, sometimes we can't control. Even our behavior, as we've learned that maybe free will is a myth, that determinism truly does exist because neuroscience has proven it, that maybe we're not really in control. But it is possible to lead a fulfilling life by focusing on what we can control, focusing on those aspects, such as our responses and our attitudes, without relying on a notion of absolute free will. So we know we can control aspects of our life, and we don't have to worry too much about the idea of free will. We just have to worry about being able to control those aspects that we can control. And we can accept life's inherent uncertainty because it enhances emotional and psychological resilience. I mean, psychological studies suggest that embracing uncertainty basically reduces anxiety over the future and builds resilience. And that is crucial for adapting to life's changes. So the fact that we can actually inherit or accept life's uncertainty enhances our ability to adapt, our resiliency towards life itself. And that's a lot to digest, folks. I mean, I get it. Regardless of where you are on the spectrum here, of whether you free will, 100% believe in free will, you somewhat believe in free will, you believe in determinism, or you believe in a kind of a mixture of both. And I think if we did a poll, the majority of people would probably find, I shouldn't say the majority of the people. I think a lot of people will automatically go to free will because they can see it and observe it without having to do any deep thinking about the subconscious and what goes on, or knowing about neuroscience, and or a good slice of the population would subscribe to the midpoint, the compatibilist ideology, in that we can find meaningful life within free will and determinism together. But wherever you stand on this issue, think about how it has an impact on your life moving forward, how free will impacts your life and your decisions and your choices, how determinism might impact your life and your choices moving forward, and live your life embracing the unknown, embracing uncertainty in order to help yourself build that resiliency towards life, be able to adapt quicker than other people, for example, who are more rigid in their thinking. So, wrapping this up here, the whole exploration of free will and determinism basically invites us to reflect on the deep and often unnoticed ways in which the concept of free will, or its absence, permeates every aspect of our life. How does it shape our actions, as I've asked, our relationships, and our societal structures? What does it mean for personal accountability and ethical behavior? Some things to think about moving forward. I want to encourage each of you to think about where you stand in this debate. How does the notion of free will or its limitations impact your daily life and your decisions? I mean, are there particular strategies you found effective in embracing the unpredictability of life at all, at any point? That'd be interesting to know. Hey, and if you've found today's episode thought-provoking, I'd encourage you to subscribe to Life Unscripted, my podcast, on your favorite podcast platform, because my goal is to continue bringing you content that challenges, educates, and inspires you. So join me next time as I unravel another complex theme about life, consciousness, and the human condition. I want to thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for tuning in. And remember, in a world that often feels scripted, embracing the unexpected can be your greatest strength.